Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched The Batman. Let's talk about it. So before we get into my thoughts on The Batman, I just want you guys to know and understand that I am a changed woman. Yep. Listen, the woman that you saw a few weeks ago doing her little reviews is not the same woman that's sitting in front of you today. She has changed. A lot of things have happened in the last few weeks. Notably, I decided to go on this journey, this endeavor to watch all of the Batman movies in anticipation for the release of the latest Batman movie, of course, but also for perhaps an upcoming video comparing some Batman movies in the next coming week on this channel. But whilst I was going on this journey, little did I know, little did I realize that I was falling in love. I was falling in love with Batman. That's right, I said it, okay? I'm a changed woman. Listen, a lot of you guys will know, okay, before this change, before this evolution of character, I wasn't the biggest fan of Batman. In fact, I would say as much in some of my videos. I'd be like, I'm not the biggest fan of Batman. Why do people sympathize with this rich white man who's going around terrorizing folk, folk who are born more lowly than him, in this bat costume? Like, why? And whilst I still hold a lot of those views, okay, don't get it twisted, I haven't changed completely. I still hold a lot of those views. I still have the same questions. I do also have a better understanding of the character, and there's an appeal now. There's an appeal that wasn't there before, okay? So I feel like I'm in the right mindset, the right headspace to share with you guys my thoughts on the latest Batman film. But before we get into all of that good stuff, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now, without further ado, let's get into my thoughts on The Batman. So The Batman is directed by Matt Reeves, who is known for his incredible work on the Planet of the Apes series, and this time around we have a brand new iteration of the character, who is portrayed by Robert Pattinson. Cue the Twilight haters now. I can't believe the number of people who are showing their whole ass on the internet, being like, Robert Pattinson was Edward from Twilight. First of all, you need to get over Twilight. You really need to move on. Sis, the series ended almost 10 years ago. You need to move on. You need to move on with this visceral hatred of Twilight. Okay, I wonder where that hatred is really coming from, the hatred of teenage girls. Anyways, secondly, the guy is an actor, and a really good one at that. So that means that whilst he could portray a character from Twilight, Edward Cullen from Twilight, much to your disgust, he could also portray another character. Like, colour me shocked. He can portray more than one character in the span of his career as an actor. So why don't you let him do that? Imagine that Robert Pattinson could go from being one bat-like creature in the form of a vampire to another, to a whole ass Batman. That is a possibility, and he can achieve this. And you know what? He did achieve it. He was phenomenal. He was exceptional. And this is the point as well where I warn you guys, this is a spoiler review. We're not going to dilly-dally with the non-spoilers. So if you haven't seen the film yet, I would advise you to go ahead, book your tickets to go watch the film and then come right back so that we can discuss this in depth. So first of all, let's discuss the plot. And here we open with, of course, as we are wont to do when it comes to a Batman story, Gotham. Here we have this version, Matt Reeves' version of Gotham, which is actually Glasgow, which I visited a couple of months after they finished shooting the film. But I think Glasgow is a great stand-in for Gotham because it gives Gotham this feel of not quite fitting in with the rest of America. Like, it feels off from what we've seen from other, you know, metropolises in America because of that European angle. But at the same time, the Gothic architecture, you know, the Gothic stylings of a lot of these buildings, and I don't know if all of these buildings are in Glasgow specifically, but they feel like they would fit perfectly in Gotham. I feel like Matt Reeves was able to create this different version of Gotham that feels less like New York than the Gotham in the Dark Knight trilogy under Christopher Nolan. So he did a great job of carving his own niche on that front and creating a whole different world. This kind of dark and dangerous underbelly that exists in the city also feels really realistic and really dark and gritty, those buzzwords when it comes to this franchise, but at the same time it feels distinctively different from what we've seen in the New Yorkanized version of Gotham. So when we're first introduced to this world, as per usual when it comes to Gotham, we are first introduced to its dark and dirty underbelly. We are introduced to it during the night, where the bat symbol is high up in the skies, in the cloudy skies, and we down below get to see the villains, the bad guys, the criminals, the miscreants who are running amok in this city, and they're just doing their criminal activity. Meanwhile, we have this voiceover by Robert Pattinson's Bruce Wayne, who is explaining how things are going. And essentially during this time, it's been about 2 years since Bruce first donned the cowl of Batman, and he first went on his quest for vengeance, and so the streets know him. The streets know him. He's known by the streets, he's known by the police, and the bat symbol is already being utilized by Jim Gordon. So we're kind of in the flow of things at this time. We're not at the very beginning, but at the same time he's not entirely refined yet. He's not a killing machine, or a not killing machine quite yet, as we see in the Dark Knight trilogy and in previous iterations of the character. Now, what I absolutely loved about the setup of this plot and about the setup of this world at the very beginning was how much it emphasized the fear aspect of Batman. Because at the end of the day, Batman is just one person, right? And unless he has these imitators, as we saw in the beginning of the Dark Knight, but the real Batman is only one person, so he can only be in one place at one time. But it feels like that he has amassed such a reputation amongst the criminal underworld that people have such fear over him that they are constantly turning behind their shoulders, you know, looking within the shadows that follow them for Batman to appear. Like, they are constantly in fear of him appearing from the shadows. And there's this great line at the beginning that's something along the lines of, you know, they fear me appearing from the shadows, but I am the shadows. And I just think that was superb, because that's exactly how it feels when you see Gotham for the first time in the night. You know, every single shadow could have Batman appearing in there, and that is enough to dissuade a lot of people from doing criminal activities. But ultimately he decides to go for this group that are kind of dressed up like Jokers. Like, they have this kind of Joker paint on this Halloween night, and they have this like kind of younger member of the group that they're trying to influence in a bad way, and he's really nervous and he doesn't really want to be there, but like I said, he's being influenced by this gang, and so they're trying to pressure him into beating up this innocent man. And then of course that's when Batman shows up. And first of all, we need to discuss the boots. We'll talk about his suit later down the line when we get to Batman as a character himself, but Batman's boots in this version of the character are a superb choice, because you hear him before you see him. The thudding, the clanking of the boots every time he makes an appearance is just mwah. Well, it's a stroke of genius. I loved it. I absolutely loved that. It reminded me of like westerns where you would hear like a cowboy's cowboy boots kind of thudding before they even make an appearance, the kind of clanking metal sound. I think it was so clever. And then he emerges from the shadows, barely distinguishable because he is of course as dark as them, and the whole mood changes. The whole dynamics change, where, you know, the gang is just horrified. They still put up a decent fight, not gonna lie. They still tried it, but Batman showed them that there's no point. Like, I was literally like, how is this one man gonna fight against this entire gang of about eight miscreants we have there? But no, like, he showed them He showed them what he needed to show them. He taught them the lesson that they needed to learn. He showed them what happens when he is on patrol, and again, it perpetuates this mythology, this mythos that surrounds him, that of course causes a lot of fear in the criminal underbelly of Gotham. But this scene is also crucial because it sets up one of the overlying themes of the whole film, where you have this man who's sitting on the ground and he was the victim of this, you know, upcoming attack from this gang. But in the end, where Batman has disposed of the gang, okay, taken care of them, he's sitting there on the ground thinking, am I next? Like, is he gonna come for me next? Like, he is genuinely terrified, and that really speaks to, again, the theme of the story here, where you ask yourself, well, Batman is intending to be vengeance. He is intending to instill fear in the criminals and the ne'er-do-wells of Gotham City, but in reality he's instilling fear into everyone. Like, how effective is his messaging? How effective is his impact, his, you know, positive impact on the city, when people can't even distinguish whether Batman is going to come to save them or hurt them? Now, I think there's this kind of symmetry between the moment that we get at the beginning of the film, where that guy is terrified of whether or not Batman is going to attack him next, versus the reaction that we get with the children at the end of the film, who reach out to Batman, accepting him, trusting him to save them. I think it just shows how the perception of Batman changes throughout the events of the film, but it also speaks to the direction that the character will want to go down following the events of the film. Like, that's where this character is headed towards, trying to be more than just a symbol of vengeance, but rather a symbol of hope. Now, the theme of Batman standing for vengeance at the beginning and perhaps hope at the end kind of bleeds into his relationship with the villain of this film, the Riddler, because in this film the Riddler was an orphan who, you know, he grew up in an orphanage with other disadvantaged children who were left behind by Gotham society, but their one hope was this renewal program that was created by Thomas Wayne. And, you know, the Waynes had this great standing in Gotham, and they were one of the founding families of Gotham, the other being the Arkhams, which Batman's mom was a part of. I didn't realize that this was a thing, by the way. I'm saying this and like stumbling over my words because I'm like, I guess this is a thing. But yeah. So Batman's mom is an Arkham. Didn't know that. Maybe I should have after watching all those Batman films, but can't remember that being a thing. And then there's this clip that keeps playing throughout the film of Thomas Wayne during his campaign to become mayor in Gotham, and he had announced this renewal program that was supposed to support the orphans at the orphanage, but that ended up being reappropriated for the criminal underworld, and the orphans were left behind and abandoned and left to basically rot away, just like the building that they lived in. And then there's this really interesting comparison that's drawn between the Riddler, who was left behind, abandoned, and he was left to suffer. You know, his fellow orphans in the orphanage became drop heads, and this is like the new drug on the scene. And you know, there were babies that died in the winter because they couldn't afford to pay for heating, and people were being eaten away by mice, and that kind of ties into one of the murders that we see later on. So yeah, it's just a really bad situation, and it also speaks to class and privilege, and that's what I really appreciated about this film. Even though it's not a major theme that's kind of shouted from the rooftops, which I would have preferred, it does speak to class and privilege, which is one of the things that I've always had an issue with when it comes to the character of Batman, because essentially you have this privileged, wealthy white male who's going around dressed like a bat and terrorizing people who are born of disadvantaged backgrounds and were left no choice but to resort to a life of crime, as we see with that young kid who was, you know, pressured by the gang. You know, if he was living in great circumstances, it's less likely that he would even be there in the first place. So the fact that Batman is terrorizing kids like him and all of these other criminals indiscriminately doesn't endear him to me, at least. And so I like the fact that the Riddler pointed this out, not realizing that he was talking to Bruce Wayne at the time, but the difference between what happened to the orphans at the orphanage that Thomas Wayne had intended to help with the renewal program, versus how Bruce was treated as an orphan when his parents were killed, and how even though he was living in a mansion, even though he was in, you know, relatively better circumstances than they were because of his class and his family's wealth, he was deemed as the poor boy that everyone felt sorry for, the Prince of Gotham, whereas everyone else who wasn't a part of that class, you know, didn't have that kind of support around them, was left far, far behind. And this kind of class aspect is something that bleeds into Batman's relationships with some of the other characters, notably Catwoman as well, where he literally gets to see the world through her eyes in one scene where he gives her his special contact, you know, camera lenses, and he's able to see the, you know, club within the club. There's this kind of dingy club where all the low lives and all of the corrupt people go to hang out, and with prostitutes, and he gets to see how these men treat her. He gets to see what she has to put up with in order to survive, and I think in that moment he kind of connects with her a little bit more and understands where she's coming from a little bit more, and that's a really important scene because, again, these are just more and more people who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, showing Batman what their world looks like. You know, he's oftentimes looked down at them from his castle, from his tower, but here he actually gets to see the world through their eyes, like I said, literally, and it allows him to have a better understanding of the city that he's so-called fighting for. Now, another interesting aspect when it comes to Batman's relationship with the Riddler is the Riddler's relationship with the two sides, the two people within Batman, and that is, of course, Batman himself, but also Bruce Wayne. Because going back to the themes of social class that are touched upon in the film, you know, the Riddler has a deep hatred for Bruce Wayne, and in fact Bruce Wayne becomes his last main target for his attacks because of the fact that Gotham felt bad for him. They held him up as the city's prince when his parents died, but the other orphans who were born into less advantageous circumstances were left behind and forgotten, and he resents him for that, and so he believes that the sins of the father must be paid by the son, and he goes for Bruce Wayne. But what's really clever about this scene it's really clever when we finally get to see the Riddler, you know, in his human form and not wearing a gimp mask. When we finally get to see him, you know, in Arkham Asylum, he starts off his spiel by saying Bruce Wayne, and in that moment you think, hang on, does he know? Has he figured it out that Batman is Bruce Wayne? Has he figured that out? Like, I genuinely thought that he had, and it was like a really tense moment because Batman doesn't reveal anything, even though just from his jaw, Robert Pattinson doing some clever jaw acting there, just from his jaw you can tell that he's nervous, and you can tell that he thinks the Riddler may have figured it out, but it turns out he hasn't figured it out, and he's referring to Bruce Wayne as another person, not realizing that he's in fact talking to Bruce Wayne. And then here we established another dynamic with the Riddler's relationship with Batman specifically, and his admiration of him, and the fact that he was inspired by him to take matters into his own hands when it comes to the seedy, filthy, corrupt underbelly of Gotham. Now that is just so clever. That is just so clever to establish the different relationships that the Riddler has with the two separate people that make up Batman / Bruce Wayne. I think it's just genius. I think it's just genius, like him not realizing that his idol is actually his enemy. Genius. But then in the case of the Riddler versus Batman specifically, it's a matter of never meet your heroes, basically, because he thought that they had been fighting the same fight. He thought that he and Batman were on the same team. He had left Batman a bunch of these cards at each of the crime scenes, you know, with all of these clues, all of these riddles, and and Batman had been following along to try and protect people, to try and protect and prevent people from being killed by him. But the Riddler the whole time was thinking like, yeah, they're on this journey together. And in actuality, he had wanted Batman to get to that location to prevent him from being hurt from the blasts from the vans, because he had set up these like 7, I think, vans across the perimeter of Gotham, and he knew, like, he had actually wanted to go to Arkham Asylum, and he had drawn Batman to him, I believe. Am I incorrect? I could be incorrect on that one, but that's what I gathered from that scene. So yeah, he thought that they were on the same team, and he was very distressed. Paul Dano doing some excellent acting. He was very distressed when he realized that they were not in fact on the same team. But this kind of plays into the theme of Batman being a vigilante and a terrible influence on the people of Gotham, the disenfranchised people of Gotham. And this isn't the first time that we've seen this, of course. I mean, we've seen this with The Dark Knight, where there were the imitators, people dressing up like Batman to instill their own sense of justice everywhere, being inspired by him. But yeah, it isn't a new theme, a new idea that has been explored in the franchise. But I do think it's interesting that this wasn't a case where someone wanted to copy Batman exactly. This was a case where someone had their own twisted, horrible ideas for what justice looked like for the corrupt class in Gotham, and they carried out some brutal, violent murders. Now, another aspect of the plot that I really enjoyed was the exploration, finally, of Batman, the world's greatest detective. This element of the character that in the films for the most part has largely been forgotten or has largely been underplayed. Here it is at the forefront at the forefront of the plot of the story, and this is something that Matt Reeves really emphasized. Like, he tried to go in creating this kind of Zodiac killer feel to the film, where Batman is tracing these murders committed by the Riddler, and he's, you know, using these clues, these riddles, figuring them out, using his brain, not just his brawn. And that was a very welcome interpretation of the character, because I feel like there have been so many iterations of Batman to this point. Like, there have been so many iterations of this bloody superhero. I think Batman is actually the hero with the most iterations that have been depicted on screen, or at least like in film, for sure. Like, even Superman, like he outnumbers Superman in terms of number of iterations. So we've seen so many different versions of this character. It was time for a new angle, and I think focusing in on the detective side of the character was a really clever move by Matt Reeves. I think the Riddler's attacks, the murders, the crime scenes he left behind were appropriately brutal, incredibly violent and horrific. And this is a 15 film, you know, rated R film, which makes complete sense because of the violence involved here. And I think they really made use of that rated R, because, you know, they really showed the extent of the Riddler's actions, and it was horrific. I also think that the Riddler was a huge improvement to Jim Carrey's iteration of the character. I'm sorry, Jim Carrey, like, I'm a fan, okay, but the Riddler from, is it like Batman Forever, is horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. He sucks. His riddles were actually clever. They actually fit thematically. He was really making a point with each of these murders. Like, the whole process just fit together really well, and his motives were clear from the beginning, even without the full explanation that we got at the end, with Paul Dano's giving a facial performance for the first time in the film. Even without that explanation, though, you understood where the Riddler was coming from, because he was targeting his kills towards corrupted people. I will say, though, when it came to setting up the big picture of the criminal underworld of Gotham and tying the connections between, you know, the mayor and the DA and the police and the criminals, you know, the gangsters, I was kind of expecting more. I didn't find the plot twists and turns to be entirely captivating and compelling or new. I thought it was pretty standard because ultimately everyone was being controlled by Falcone. Like, ultimately Falcone was the big bad. He was the one at the top of the food chain, because it turns out that when Thomas Wayne died, the billions that he had left behind for the renewal fund ended up in the wrong hands, and then they got greedy and decided to basically eliminate the competition, which was Maroni. And so they had this big bust where they destroyed Maroni's operations and gave themselves a massive pat on the back for it, making the careers of the DA and the mayor and everyone, whilst at the same time eliminating the competition and putting this, like, drops, was it called? Is it drops on the scene? So now Gotham has a huge drop head problem where a bunch of people are addicted to this new drug, and it's all being controlled by Falcone. And whilst that is solid and it makes sense, it ties everything together really well, it didn't really blow my mind in terms of giving us this, like, murder mystery and this neo-noir kind of detective story that has twists and turns and a really bombastic ending. Okay, so now let's talk about the key players. Let's talk about the characters themselves. First one up, we have, of course, Batman. My Batman. Yep, I said it. I think R-Patz is a phenomenal Batman. Yep, like, all of you Twilight haters can go cry off in a corner somewhere. I don't care. I thought he was fabulous. I thought he was exceptional. The stance was terrifying. Like, I was genuinely afraid of this Batman. There were times when he was standing in a tiny little, like, living room, like a tiny space, especially when there are a ton of police officers surrounding him, and they're all just kind of like, the way that they moved around him, it was like, this guy you don't know what could happen if we stand too close. He had that air of back away. Also, let's talk about the suit. The suit is perfect. The suit is truly perfection. Again, I have my queries and qualms about this grown man dressing up like a bat and fighting crime. That's something that applies to all the Batmen. That's something it's still bizarre to me. The little still bizarre to me, okay, back in the DC world. But this suit was legit. Like, this suit was excellent. First of all, the suit doesn't feel too refined because he's not at that stage in his Bat career where he's got everything figured out. So it still feels like he's piecing things together, still, you know, working on certain things, but the overall effect is quite effective. The overall impact, especially when he emerges from the shadows, they used that trick so well. Like, it was genuinely terrifying, and it fits in with the overall feel of this film. This film is very dark, both, you know, visually but also thematically, because, you know, a lot of these other post Dark Knight trilogy directors have not understood what worked when it came to Christopher Nolan's trilogy. They just thought that the aesthetic of darkness and barely being able to make out what's going on screen was enough to convey depth, but in reality that is not the case. But this film understands that with the visuals, the dark visuals, also need to come the depth, okay, the darkness in tone and in themes, and this film has that combination down pat, okay, especially with the aesthetic of Batman himself in that world. So the costume designer here is Jacqueline Duran. If you're a costume enthusiast, you already know her name because she's a seasoned costume designer. She's done the likes of Anna Karenina, a bunch of Keira Knightley films like Atonement as well, with that classic green dress, and now the Batman. She has created this new Batman costume, and I think it's absolutely phenomenal, and especially with the cowl as well, because Robert Pattinson has quite a sharp kind of square jawline, so the whole cowl, the whole mask is quite square. If you'll notice, it suits his face shape perfectly. He also looks so much taller in the suit. Like, when he's Bruce Wayne, which we'll talk about in a second, he's just so small and weedy and like an overgrown adolescent, but in the bat suit, like, he looks like he means business. Oh, he just knocked it out of the park, in my opinion. He was brutal, but at the same time, he had a code. He wasn't going around shooting people. he wasn't shooting people, but he was doing everything but, and especially at the end there where he literally could not get up. Like, he was watching Catwoman get beaten up and he could not get up because he was literally just on his last legs, and then he reaches into some pocket or something, grabs what I think was adrenaline. I hope it wasn't the drug that's on the streets. Like, I think it's adrenaline, stabs himself with it and just keeps going. So then next naturally comes Batman's alter ego, Bruce Wayne. And yes, Bruce Wayne is Batman's alter ego because, as Paul Dano explains brilliantly in the film, Batman is the real version of Bruce Wayne. Like, even though he is hidden behind the mask, this is the closest that he comes to being his real authentic self, is when he's in the suit. So Bruce Wayne is the alter ego here, and as far as alter egos go, he sucks. He absolutely sucks. I'm so sorry, but this Bruce Wayne just ain't it. Right in the gutter. He really ain't it. First of all, he's barely in this film, okay? But secondly, he's just like a non-personality. I was kind of disappointed. I wasn't a fan of his portrayal of Bruce Wayne. I understood what they were going for. This like moody, brooding teenager, emo teenager. But nah. There's literally not much else I can say about him other than he looks like an overgrown adolescent going through an emo phase. Like, nah. Someone get this kid some therapy. In general, Batman needs therapy. But this Bruce Wayne, what? Like, please, no. So next we have Catwoman as portrayed by Zoe Kravitz. I thought she was great. Yeah, like, I thought she was really great. They did a great job of kind of integrating her into the story, giving her that angle of being Falcone's daughter, and she had like a vengeance of her own. She wanted to inflict vengeance herself, and she was frustrated with Batman with not, you know, being in line with what she wanted to do, which was an edge further and actually killing Falcone and killing the people who had hurt her, as well as her friend who was, you know, tortured and killed by this group. So yeah, she had an anger to her herself that felt more legitimate than what we saw with, you know, previous versions of Catwoman, especially Michelle Pfeiffer's version. Even though Michelle Pfeiffer had a more iconic look to her, the motives of the character and the persona were just very, very weak, whereas here she's more grounded. She exists in this horrible underbelly of Gotham, and you can see what has become of her as a result. I do think that the Catwoman fight sequences felt fake and looked fake. Like, those kicks looked CG as hell, and I don't get it because she's in like a full body suit, including the mask that she wears, so it could have been anyone in there. We didn't have to make it so obviously CG, but maybe it was because they were trying to speed up the movement so that she would be as agile as a cat. Although the Catwoman ties, you know, two cats is very weak here. I mean, she has a few cats. She has long, obviously fake nails. Side note, as a nail aficionado myself, okay, someone who enjoys all things nails and decorating hands, I was appalled by the nail choice. I know what they were going for, trying to make them look like claws, but they could have painted the nails in a neutral color so you still have the effect of these pointy nails, but without making them look like obvious press-ons. Like, they looked like obvious press-ons that you have to paint because otherwise you can see the plasticness of them. And then we have Lieutenant Gordon, who's portrayed by Jeffrey Wright. He has been working. Here on my channel, I often point out whenever there is an actor who has clearly been cashing in those paychecks, clearly been working hard, okay, throughout the year. We saw that with Olivia Colman and Oscar Isaac last year, and Jeffrey Wright is absolutely one of them. He is everywhere. He is everywhere, and I love that for him. And he is an excellent Jim Gordon. He is an excellent Jim Gordon, and I love the fact that he's besties with Batman. Like, he's legitimately friends with Batman. They make a great pair together. That scene where Batman is at the police station and miraculously no one has unveiled his face. Miraculously no one took off his mask when he was unconscious, and, you know, Jim is like, you know, give us the room, and everyone clears out. They're about to bully Batman, but they all clear career route, and then they're just murmuring and Jim is like, you need to get out of here. And it was just like such a cool kind of moment and insight into their friendship that's developed over the years, because I guess Jim believes in what Batman is doing for Gotham. And then Batman swings a punch at him, and later on he's like, man, you could have pulled the punch, and Batman's like, I did. Like, there aren't many comedic moments in this film, but that was a good one. That was a really, really good one. And then next up we have Alfred, and I think that casting Andy Serkis to portray a younger version of this character was a stroke of genius that is unfortunately not utilized as much as I thought it would be. Alfred is barely in this film, which is surprising considering how much of a presence he has in previous Batman movies. You know, the relationship that Alfred and Bruce usually have in other Batman movies was kind of given to Jim Gordon and Batman, basically. So both Alfred and Bruce, you know, that side of the character barely make an appearance here. But from what we do see from Andy Serkis, I think he is perfect casting for the role. And my only critique would be to give him more to do next time. You know, hopefully they get a sequel and hopefully we see more of him. I will say that there was one part of the whole story that I thought was a little bit disappointing, and that was when there was for a moment this suggestion that Thomas Wayne had been a part of the criminal world of Gotham. You know, he had been in on it with the Falcons and everyone, and he was just as corrupt as everyone else, and that's why the Riddler wanted Bruce Wayne to pay for the crimes of Thomas Wayne. But then Alfred kind of distills that, and he's like, no, you know, your father didn't want that journalist to be killed when he went to Falcone. He just wanted to scare that journalist a little bit. He wanted to shake him up a little bit. He didn't expect Falcone to kill him, although he should have. he should have. I think that was a bit disappointing. Like, I would have preferred if Thomas Wayne was just as flawed as the rest of them, and perhaps I would have created an even bigger inner conflict between Bruce, knowing that his father had been capable of these things for the sake of protecting his mother. I feel like that would have been a pretty cool twist, and again, something a bit more interesting and nuanced to introduce to the story. And then we have some of the villains. Of course, I already talked about the Riddler in terms of his story and his plan, but I do think that Paul Dano absolutely knocked it out of the park when it came to portraying this villain. I don't think his performance was as like loud and instantly memorable and quotable as, for example, Heath Ledger's version of the Joker, but I do think he does a great job, especially in the context of this world, which is grittier and more realistic and grounded. And then he does have the moments of outbursts that are very There Will Be Blood, which I think is why you get Paul Dano. It's why you get him on board. By the way, he looks like he hasn't aged a day since There Will Be Blood. He looks great. I don't know how old he is. He looks like a vampire. But then of course we have that scene at the end where he's in Arkham and he has a new like cellmate. He has a new next door neighbor in the form of the Joker. So going into this film, when I glanced at the cast list, I did see Barry Keoghan's name on there, and Barry Keoghan portrays Druig in the MCU, over in the MCU, in the Eternals universe. So I was really interested to see what character he would portray here. But then, you know, as I watched the film, not gonna lie, I did forget that he was supposed to be in the film. But then later on, I realized that he was portraying this kind of sneak peek of the Joker, and I am very intrigued. First of all, it looks like there's a lot of prosthetics involved here. That smile looked like so unnatural and so crazy. Ooh, I'm really interested to see what they're doing with this version. And yeah, am I sick and tired of seeing so many Jokers? Like, yeah, this is like the third Joker that we've gotten in what, just as many years? It's crazy. It's crazy. But I mean, this is a really cool world. So if we can make it work, I'm really interested to see what Barry Keoghan can bring to the table. I hope they keep him on and they don't just use him for the cameo appearance, because I think he could be like a new Heath Ledger in terms of giving us a standout performance when given this opportunity. And then speaking of impressive prosthetics, we have to of course mention Colin Farrell hidden underneath the penguinness of it all. He was completely unrecognizable, but also really, really great. And I did watch his Hot Ones episode where he was like eating the spicy wings, and he did actually echo what Paul Dano says in the film, where he was mentioning how being underneath all of those prosthetics actually felt liberating to him because you couldn't see his face, and so he was able to kind of disappear into the performance and just kind of, you know, he felt free, he felt freer, with no judgment being placed on him specifically because his face was obscured. So then finally, I did also want to mention the music here, which I very much enjoyed. The score was composed by Michael Giacchino, who is a seasoned composer, just like with Jacqueline Duran, who's a seasoned designer. But then just as pronounced as the score itself was the featuring of the Nirvana song Something in the Way. I didn't know that song going in, don't, please. I didn't know what it was. I looked it up later, but excellent song choice. Excellent song choice. I'll be listening to that song all week. I know it. I'll be listening to that song all week. It was perfect for this film, perfect for this world, and it was utilized perfectly as well. And it's with all of that being said that I'm going to be giving The Batman an 8.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on The Batman, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this movie down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch you videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!